As one of the elements of art, line is an essential tool in any artist's toolbox. Lines can express emotion, create depth, or define shapes, and every aspiring artist should master basic kinds of line before moving on to more complex techniques. In this module, we will be talking about implied line, contour line, hatching and cross-hatching, and expressive line. But before we can even talk about lines, we need to talk about dots. Why? Because dots are sometimes used to create the illusion of line. Such is the case of Lapita pottery, which uses dots to create the illusion of lines for decorative purposes. The Lapita were the original people of Melanesia. They are known for the fired pottery, mostly with geometric designs, as well as for their fish hooks, beads, and rings made of shells. The Lapita were seafarers who initially colonized the Bismarck Archipelago around 2000 BC, settling in the Solomon Islands around 1600 BC, and other parts of Polynesia and Micronesia between 1000 BC and 500 BC. Along with lines, dots can sometimes be used as helpers in storytelling, usually in cultures with strong oral traditions. Such is the case of the Chokwe, who create the Sona sand drawings using dots and lines to tell stories. The Chokwe begin by drawing an orthogonal grid of equidistant dots with their fingertips. The number of rows and columns depends on the story being told. There are similar such drawings in the northern islands of Vanuatu. In Vanuatu, however, the artist doesn't use dots but lines exclusively. The artist will create a grid with as many rows and columns as necessary to guide the fingertip as he draws a continuous meandering line. These drawings are produced directly on the ground, in sand, volcanic ash, or clay. Contour lines define outlines, shapes, a figure most often. For some artists, outlining shapes with contour lines is almost all they need to create an artwork. Keith Haring is one such example. He uses contour line as a way to quickly make his art without further operations. Indian artist Manaku would draw the contour lines, then erase them, recreating them from memory as he went to apply layers of color. Manaku is an artist associated with the Pahari school in the Punjab Hills, Kingdom of Gular. He was active between 1725 and 1760. This painting of Manaku is in a different stage of development. Lines almost disappear as the artist applies color. Australian artist Aretha Brown uses rough outlines before applying paint to her artwork. This blind drawing by Egon Schiele, an Austrian artist, is a good example of contour line. It is also a good example of how shapes can be left to the imagination. An implied line is a line that does not exist. It is left to the imagination. The actual line is not visible but implied by other elements, other lines, for instance, or hatching. This cancelled plate by French artist Edgar Degas is a good example of how much can be implied with very few means. Hatching is the method of marking something with closely spaced parallel lines. Hatching is usually employed in drawings, graphic novels, or engravings. Most often, each line is done in one stroke, meaning that there is no smudging nor licking. Hatching is used to imply shadow or a dark tone, but can be used for other purposes. The closer together the lines are drawn, the darker the shadow or tone will appear. In Boy Escorting a Blind Beggar, Simon Andreas Krauss uses hatching to add shadows. Same thing here in tis Leonardo da Vinci's drawing, titled A Design for an Equestrian Monument. Notice how the strokes of the pen and pencil in both drawings are quick and resolute. Cross-hatching is a similar technique, the difference being that the artist uses a second set of perpendicular lines. The closer the cross-hatched lines are drawn together, the darker the shadow or tone will appear. Hatching and cross-hatching are often combined in the same artwork. Peter Paul Rubens uses both hatching and cross-hatching to represent shadows and give volume to the shapes. It may be more difficult to control the amount of ink when dealing with organic shapes, such as in this example. Baccio Bandinelli also uses hatching and cross-hatching to represent tonal value. Notice how there's more ink at the edges. That's where each stroke starts and stops, leaving more ink. For that reason, this technique may be more appropriate when the artist is depicting hard edges, such as a basalt rock with its geometric shapes. 17th century Dutch artist Rembrandt often combines hatching and cross-hatching in his etchings as well. In this self-portrait, the young artist depicts himself in a humoristic way using hatching and cross-hatching. In this etching, Rembrandt represents organic shapes, a human figure laying against a tree and a lion also in the foreground. In the background, the viewer can see various geometric shapes of building, all done with just hatching and cross-hatching. In this work by John Bevan Ford, the artist uses cross-hatching to represent weaving. John Bevan Ford is known for his ink drawings combining depictions of traditional Maori cloaks with landscapes. Expressive lines convey emotion based on their character and weight. They can be used to imply movement or to give significance to a particular feature. In reference drawing, expressive lines are contour lines that we do several times over. By pressing just this much, very lightly at first, only to add ever more pressure on some parts as we approach the intended shape. This drawing by Pierre Andrieux is one such example. The artist gives different weights to lines, and by doing so, the lion's head seems closer to the viewer than its feet. The artist also applies broad movements of the hand. By doing so, the viewer gets the impression that the lion is breathing. In this lithography, Maori modernist artist Ralph Hotera uses simple but effective markings to depict raw emotion. Artists usually draw using their dominant hand, but sometimes they engage other parts of the body too. In the artwork Pencil Mask, 1972, German artist Rebecca Horn uses a head mask to create a drawing. There are several interesting things going on in this artwork. First of all, it is as much a drawing as it is a performance art piece. Secondly, the artist makes her own tool, a pencil holder to use on her head. And finally, she can do as many drawings with this tool that she created as she wishes. In the artwork Up to and Including Her Limits, 1973-76, Carolee Schneemann uses her whole body to create a drawing that is also a performance. You can really use everything as a tool to make drawings, even car tires, such as in this drawing from Guy Overfelt. Notice how the rubber from the tires almost looks like ink. It has so much detail and texture. In Burnout 1977 with Smokey and the Bandit Trans Am, 1998, Guy Overfelt uses a very specific car to create a drawing using the left back tire as a drawing tool. This artwork speaks of American popular culture, more specifically muscle cars and movie pictures.